Blue Blood meets Blue Blood this Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. local time in the Pacific time zone, as the Penn State Nittany Lions travel to Los Angeles to take on the USC Trojans in the Coliseum. USC is given a 51.9% chance to win this game per ESPN's FPI. What's that about? Penn State is ranked 4th nationally, 5-0, 2-0 in conference play. USC's unranked, 3-2, 1-2 in conference play. Aha! As Week 6 should have taught everyone, and as college football history should have taught those who are very invested in the sport, like I am and like much of you are, I hope all of you are very invested in it, the higher-ranked team does not always win. And sometimes records can be deceiving, especially when strength of schedules are not equal. And we will talk about this in this video. But Penn State is ranked number 4. They're 5-0, 2-0 in Big Ten Conference play. They're undefeated in the polls, in power ratings, and in straight-up record, even in execution, just via the eye test. They are in the stratosphere that Oregon and Ohio State are. They are in that near elite to elite bubble among the exclusive teams that has a shot of winning the national championship. They're 5.5-point favorites. They opened up as 4-point favorites. And while this matchup is not as illustrious and intense and anticipated on the surface as Oregon and Ohio State is, by the way, if you want my thoughts on that matchup, please click the link in the top right corner of your screen and or visit the link in the pinned comment if that's easier for you, so you can watch that video and help us get to 10,000 views on there and share your thoughts on what is going to be the matchup of the week, obviously. We also want 10,000 views on here, but it's more realistic on that game since it's, well, game of the week. But anyway, this game, when you are willing to play hypotheticals and look into the future, I think has just as large, just as intense and valuable implications. For example, James Franklin and Lincoln Riley have struggled to break through the glass ceiling. Lincoln Riley has not made the college football playoff since 2019 at Oklahoma, and James Franklin has never made the college football playoff. Riley has a 77-20 career record. Franklin has a 117-54 career record. Riley at USC has a 22-10 record. Franklin at Penn State has a 93-39 record. They're both good coaches. Some would say great coaches. Some would even try to say near elite, but recent history, I think, pushes back on that. And they have top 15 rosters. I think they both have near elite to elite coaching staffs. Their assistant coaching pool is one of the best in college football for both the Trojans and the Nittany Lions. They face off to really test how serious Penn State is, because they haven't played much of anyone, and also to test how truly tough USC is this year. I think there is no doubt that moving forward, USC is on the right track with the staff that they have. As Josh Pate said in reaction to Minnesota's upset over USC, an upset that I called to happen, that he called to happen, and that knocked USC to the top 25, Lincoln Riley is in year 1 of a rebuild. Yes, he's been at USC now for 3 years, but he totally overhauled everything in the 2024 preseasons. This is really year 1 of a rebuild. But after this season, I think USC is going to be a Big Ten championship contender and perhaps a national title contender. And I think Penn State right now is a national title contender. So a lot of implications, a whole lot of them, in this football game. And we're going to talk about that here because Penn State is a favorite. And on the surface, with the record and the rating, you think they're going to come in here and they are going to show themselves to be, well, a great team and show USC they are a 500 team. But looks can be deceiving, alas, as showcased by last weekend, where Tennessee, Alabama, Michigan, the Trojans themselves, the Missouri Tigers, and many other teams got the rug pulled right out from under their feet. Before we continue with this video, I want you to please subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit that notification bell so that you can get notified when we release future content. Comment your analysis and score prediction for this game down in the comments section. Your score prediction only requires 5 characters for the score and a few additional characters to showcase the team who you're picking to win the game. It's just that simple, just that easy to type in the comment section. It helps me to engage with you, get your thoughts and opinion on this game, and also it helps boost engagement, which gives us more viewers, which gives us more subscribers, and helps grow what is the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. Also, share this video around with others to help us get to 10,000 views. I'd love to get that on every video if possible. And if Josh Pate and Joel Klatt and many of these other guys can do it with hard work that I put into this and that you put into this by watching and giving your input, we can do it. Check out our Discord server too via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, where we have a dedicated USC and Penn State football thread, dedicated threads for all 18 Big Ten teams. Do please check that out and join. It is for free. And if you want to go the extra mile and support the channel, check out the Patreon page or merchandise store via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. But liking, sharing, subscribing, joining the Discord server, hitting the bell, and commenting, those are the biggest things you can do to support the channel, and they're all free. So thank you very much for doing that. I want to go in and look at the forest before we dive into the trees and the nitty-gritty details, because if you don't look at things from the broad perspective sometimes, and you dive straight into the details, you can end up missing other key details because you didn't capture the full image yet. So I want to make sure we capture the full image here. And the full image is obviously Penn State right now looks like the better football team. They do. The reason why USC really has a chance here is because they're at home and there's a massive travel distance between these teams, and USC is more battle tested, but especially that former point that I just made. Penn State is viewed as 18.2 points better than the average college football team in FPI. USC is viewed as 14.6 points better than the average college football team in FPI. And the distance between these two teams is even further when you look at Bill Connolly's S&P+. Thank you, Bill Connolly. 24.9. That is how many points Penn State is predicted to be superior to the average college football team from S&P+'s perspective. And S&P+ is tempo adjusted. It's more complex and therefore I think superior to ESPN's FPI. And USC is only viewed as 13.7 points better than the average college football team in S&P+. Tempo adjusted is critical because what FPI has done before, and Oklahoma from last season is the perfect example of this. FPI cares more about a team winning 70-10 and views that as more impressive than a team who wins 49-0, even if the 49-0 performance and win was better via the eye test, via even quality of opponents sometimes, as long as there's not a big difference between them. FPI loves points and honestly comes across to me oftentimes as more of a scoreboard watcher, while S&P Plus is more in-depth. And I've mentioned this before in other videos. There's a gap between USC and Penn State in both of these power ratings, and when you look at S&P Plus, there is even a clearer gap. You factor in home field advantage here, well, Penn State is favored to win by about 2 points or so per FPI. And you look at S&P Plus, Penn State's favored to win by about 8 points. That's factoring in a 3-point addition for USC because they are at home. I think the reason FPI is actually favoring USC to win here is also because of the distance traveled, because that's a feature actually in ESPN's FPI for NFL teams. They factor in travel distance as a part of their win probability, which is smart here. Traveling is hard on teams. USC is college football's, or was college football's, most traveled team, thanks to Josh Pate for providing that statistic. Diving into some more statistics, and USC after this weekend very well may not be the most traveled team in college football yet again, but it wouldn't surprise me because, well, they've gone to Minnesota, they have gone to Michigan, they have traveled to LSU, for example. Penn State has a 0.347 points per play margin. That means for every play Penn State runs compared to every play that their opponent runs, Penn State will score 0.347 more points. And that adds up very, very quickly. USC has a 0.102 points per play margin, which really what these two things show is how dominant a team is. How much more efficient and superior is Team A compared to their average team faced, their average competition. This shows that Penn State is more dominant than USC is. Well, who would have thought that to be the case? Penn State's 5-0, USC's 3-2. Sometimes a team that has a worse record at face value is the more dominant team than the team that's undefeated, but that's not the case here. Penn State has game controlled all of their opponents efficiently for at minimum a half. For West Virginia, for Kent State, for UCLA, for, I would even say Illinois, it was 3 or 4 quarters. For Bowling Green, it was 1 half. And as for USC, the only team that they have truly game controlled for a half or more is Utah State and also, I would say, Wisconsin. That's really it. Minnesota and Michigan were constantly, and I mean constantly, were within realistic striking distance if you watched those games. Michigan actually was game controlling USC for that entire first half. And LSU and USC was very much a back and forth waltz. So far as we've seen, Penn State broadly is the superior team. And even when you factor in strength of schedule, that reigns true thanks to ESPN's game control analytic, which is basically how would the average college football team do against Team A's schedule relative to Team A's performance. Maybe I didn't phrase that right, but how would the average college football team do against Penn State's schedule? And then factoring in how Penn State did. Well, Penn State's 16th in game control. That means only 15 teams would perform, expected by the computers, perform better than Penn State with an identical schedule. As for USC, they're 49th. So 48 teams would perform better with USC's schedule than the Trojans did. And for a lot of those teams, that means they would be 5-0 or 4-1. They have the 41st strength of schedule the Trojans do. They're 49th in game control. Penn State has the 95th strength of schedule, and they are 16th in game control. So Penn State, the more dominant team, the better team. They're ranked number 4th. You can argue whether that they're overrated or not. They're ahead of Georgia. They're ahead of Alabama. They're ahead of Tennessee. And FPI, several rating systems, and many people would say they shouldn't be ahead of those teams, but they are. And regardless, they are a better team than USC, at least from what we know. The critical matchup here, I believe, is Penn State's defense against USC's passing offense. That's the matchup right now. And this means that USC's offensive line has to play their best game of the year because they are facing the most coordinated and high upside pass rush that they've played all season long. Even higher than Michigan's because Penn State has better linebacker play than Michigan does. Penn State's defense is better coordinated. They're going to manufacture a better pass rush. And they have that same upside talent that Michigan does in pass rush. Not necessarily the same in stopping the run, but in getting to the quarterback. Absolutely. Talk about Abdul Carter. You talk about Zane Durant. You talk about Devon J. Thomas. You talk about Donnie Dennis Sutton, Keziah Izzard, Alonzo Ford Jr., Amin Vanover, and that entire deep defensive line, which is full of juniors and seniors, very veteran-led. They go up against a USC offensive line that is young. Elijah Page is a redshirt freshman. Mason Murphy, redshirt junior. Alani Noah, true sophomore. Emmanuel Pregnon and John Monheim are redshirt seniors. They're the most experienced players, and those are the ones that I hear the least about from USC fans, which to me tells me that they are the best on the team. And I think I see that reflected in the fact that Woody Marks has been able to have some productive success on the ground, while in pass protection, Well, that's just a yikes. Let me say that, for example. Miller Moss has been sacked and pressured to death. He has been sacked 8 times this season through 5 games. And in reality, it's worse than that. He just has good enough receivers to quickly get the ball out and enough mobility to also get the football out. But he has been pressured out of his mind. Out of his mind. And he is facing a Penn State defense that earned 7 sacks and 12 TFLs on Illinois. And also did a pretty darn good job against UCLA's offensive line. And UCLA's offensive line is better than USC's, and Penn State was sleepwalking in that game. Right now, the USC Trojans, when you look at passing offense, they are, 29th nationally in yards per game with 443.2. They're actually behind Penn State in total yardage. When you look at passing offense, they have 42.6 pass attempts per game, which is 5th. 27.4 completions per game, which is 6th. Consequently, they are outside the top 100 in incompletions per game, and they only complete 64.32% of their passes. They pass for 292.8 yards per game, which is 18th. They are 32nd in quarterback sack percentage. They are 54th in QB sacked per game. They have an average team passer rating of 132.2. I think Miller Moss, and a large part of it is his supporting cast, is Lincoln Riley's worst quarterback of his tenure. Maybe he's only better than Spencer Rattler. But also, Lincoln Riley has one of his worst, if not his worst, offensive line of his head coaching career, a wide receiver room that is very young, has a lot of upside, but also inexperience, and a running back room that, just quite frankly, isn't what it was at Oklahoma, and I don't think is at the same caliber as last year's or 2022's running back room was. This is a very weak and thin USC offense relative to the expectations that I and everyone should place on a Lincoln Riley offense. They're still good. They're just not near elite, not even close to elite. And at best, I would say, they're great. How does that unit do against a Penn State defense that has shown some cracks, but overall looks like they are pretty close to an elite defense, or at least a near elite defense, particularly on the D line, in the linebacker room. And they have some questions in the secondary, but they also have players in the secondary who can step up, who are talented and also very young, like USC's wide receiver room. How does Kyron Hudson, Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon, Zachariah Branch, how do they do against Jalen Kimber, A.J. Harris, Jalen Reed, Zakee Wheatley, and Cam Miller? How does that matchup work? That is what I think is the critical matchup here. The point of interest in this game is USC's passing offense against Penn State's passing defense, really against Penn State's defense overall, because every part of Penn State's defense, I think, fits into this matchup because of the questions on the offensive line for USC. If USC had an elite offensive line, it would just be, what do Penn State's linebackers and DBs do to deflect some passes, maybe to force an interception, deceive Miller Moss in coverage? But Penn State doesn't have to do that. They need to get to the quarterback, and they need to defend the pass. They can do both of those things. This is a matchup that does not go in USC's favor, from what I can tell, and we'll get into that as this video progresses. And there are also going to be multiple videos detailing these teams and this matchup that come out in the following days. So hitting that notification bell is very, very important. Let's check out the offenses for both of these teams. I would take Penn State at quarterback, running back, tight end, the entirety of the offensive line, except for wide receiver. That I would give to USC. You look at Drew Aller, and you compare him to Miller Moss, and you will see something that is surprising and that I would not have exactly expected in the preseason. But I wouldn't have thought it to be end of the world stuff either, because I thought that, well, quarterback play in the Big Ten was still going to be relatively weak compared to other conferences in 2024. It would be upgraded compared to Big Ten quarterback play in the past, but still overall weak. Drew Aller is objectively the better quarterback than Miller Moss. Drew Aller right now has 1,101 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, 1 interception, a 187.6 passer rating. He has an 88.8 QBR, 89 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 10.7 yards per pass attempt. Miller Moss, meanwhile, he has 1,398 passing yards, 7 yards per pass attempt, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and a 134.1 passer rating. And you can say that Miller Moss has been under pressure a lot. Fine. I actually, agree with that. He has been under pressure a ton, and his supporting cast does not help him. But I can also tell you that Drew Aller has been sacked 6 times so far this season, and he no longer has Olu Fashanu blocking for his blind side, protecting his blind side. Penn State, something that they are not good at this season is QB sacked percentage. Drew Aller is sacked on 5% of his dropbacks. That's 56th nationally. Thank you to teamrankings.com for that statistic, where I scrape data and get most of my statistics from. And Penn State allows about 1.2 sacks per game, which is, 33rd. You factor that in, Drew Aller is having more success as a scrambler than Miller Moss is. More importantly, Drew Aller has 103 pass attempts. Miller Moss is 200, and he has passed for 297 fewer yards on about 97 fewer attempts. Much higher efficiency. He has 1/4 of the interceptions that Miller Moss has with the same amount of touchdowns. And Miller Moss's long pass of the year is 42. Aller's is 59. So I think it's clear as day is compared to night that Aller is the better quarterback here. And he is having a quietly impressive season. Yes, they are spoon-feeding him throws. I get that. But even factoring that in, he's having a very impressive season. And I think Miller Moss is having a bit of a disappointing season. You look at the running backs here. This is even clearer. Penn State has Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. And combined on the season, they have ran for 1,089 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, and 11 rushing touchdowns. If not for Singleton opting out of the UCLA game last minute due to an illness, Penn State would probably have even more rushing touchdowns and rushing yards. They did sleepwalk through the UCLA game and have kind of a somewhat, I'd say, disappointing performance relative to what I think Penn State is and what they can be. But to say that their performance against UCLA represents their rushing offense is intellectually dishonest, because what they have done against West Virginia, against Bowling Green, against Kent State, and also against Illinois, I mean, they ran for nearly 6 yards per carry against Illinois, dominating on the ground. And Nicholas Singleton has 408 rushing yards for 7.7 yards per carry, 3 rushing touchdowns. Katron Allen has 367 rushing yards. He's averaging 5 yards per carry with 2 rushing touchdowns. Woody Marks has 468 rushing yards, 5.8 yards per carry, 4 rushing touchdowns with a long of 65. You have Quinton Joyner behind him, who's averaging 7.9 yards per carry, 2 rushing touchdowns, 212 yards. USC is passing a lot more than they're running. It's the opposite for Penn State. Take a look at these numbers here. You look at rushing offense for Penn State and USC. Penn State has 218.2 rushing yards per game on average. That's 11th. USC is 150.4. It's 70th. USC averages 5.2 yards per rush attempt. That's 21st. Penn State averages 5.4 yards per rush attempt, which is 17th. How do they have similar yards per rush attempt and yet such different yards per game? Well, that's because, again, their offenses function totally differently. They both have genius offensive minds in Andy Kotelnicki and Lincoln Riley, but they run things differently. 62.73% of Penn State's plays are runs. That's 12th nationally. 39.45% of USC's plays are run attempts. That's 126th. Talk about polarization, polar opposites on the spectrum. That's Penn State and USC's rushing attacks in how often they're called and utilized and relied upon to win football games. And Penn State's even factoring in they run the ball that much more is still successful. And that's thanks to a superior offensive line. That's thanks to better running backs, to better tight ends like Tyler Warren, for example, who's 289 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. He's been used on the ground as well. Just an absolute unit and a weapon. I would take Drew Shelton, Ole Vega, Ione, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, Anthony Dunco, and Tyler Warren over USC's Elijah Page, Emmanuel Pregnon, Jonah Monheim, Alani Noah, Mason Murphy, and Lake McCree. Is Lake McCree healthy, by the way? He isn't shown on the injured reserve per ourlads.com. Maybe it's Cade Eldridge at tight end. But factoring in the tight end and offensive line groups for blocking, and then even tight end for receiving, and just that whole group, I would take Penn State's over USC's. But watch out for USC at wide receiver. They have Jacoby Lane, Zachariah Branch, and Kyron Hudson, who have had over 200 receiving yards. Jacoby Lane has 4 receiving touchdowns. Deuce Robinson has 3. Those players are like tight ends in how big they are and long they are and intimidating they are in the red zone. So pay attention to those players. Wouldn't shock me if, like they have for the whole season, been the only receivers who can reliably score touchdowns in the red zone. That wouldn't shock me at all. Pay attention to them. On defense, I would give Penn State everything in the blink of an eye. This is one of college football's best defenses. It is up there with Iowa's. It is up there with Ohio State's. Ohio State and Iowa, I think right now, especially the Buckeyes, are a tier ahead of Penn State. But Penn State has not allowed any third quarter points all season long. That is pretty darn impressive from Tom Allen's unit. Total second half team is Penn State, and specifically their defense. Look at this right here. Penn State allows 3.4 first quarter points per game, 30th. 4.6 second quarter points per game, 23rd. 0 third quarter points per game, first. And 3.4 fourth quarter points per game. USC is one of the best staffs in the nation on the defensive side of the football. And they're a second half defense as well. Look at these. Opponent first half points allowed per game. Penn State 8, USC 11. Opponent second half points allowed per game. Penn State 3.4, USC 7.4. So both of these staffs are very adaptive. They know how to make adjustments. The problem for USC is they don't have the players that Penn State does. Not even close. These defensive lines are not even comparable. Linebacker could be comparable, but I think Penn State is still ahead there. And as for the secondary, I'd still take Penn State there. You look at total defense, Penn State is 4th in yards allowed per game. USC is 24th. USC allows opponents to gain 5.5 yards per play. 60th. Penn State is 5th in that category, only allowing 3.8. USC only allows 57.6 opponent plays per game. I think a big part of that is the fact that Michigan didn't run many plays against them. They didn't, because they ran the ball all the time. I think that's a little bit inflated right there for USC. As for Penn State, they allow 60.8 opponent points per play. So Penn State, their defense on an average basis is on the field longer than USC's, and yet is that much better. I know competition is not equal. I know that USC has played tougher competition, but still something to take note of. You look at passing defense. Penn State only allows 5.7 yards per pass attempt to USC 6.8 or 6.5. USC allows 9.6 opponent yards per completion, which is 12th, pretty good there. And Penn State allows 9.8 yards per completion, which is 17th. You look at opponent average team passer rating, Penn State allows an average of a 110.3 opponent passer rating, which is 17th. USC allows a 124.7 opponent average team pass rating, which is 42nd. And again, it's factoring in Braden Locke, it's factoring in Alex Orji, factoring in Max Brosmer, Utah State, who has Spencer Petras starting at quarterback. and played Bryson Barnes, who beat them last year, by the way, when they played the Trojans. The only good quarterback USC has played is Garrett Nussmeier, who did not have a world-beating performance against the Trojans either. This is a defense in USC that is much better coached than they are on the field, if that makes sense. Like the adjustments, the coaching, the play calling, that is all better than the execution, the talent, the hard hits, the tackling, etc. And as for Penn State, I don't think Tom Allen is as good as a defensive coordinator as D'Anton Lynn is, but I do think that he has equal, if not slightly better, assistants defensively surrounding him, and he certainly has a better defensive roster. Penn State this season, right now, they have 13 sacks on the year, 4 interceptions, 19 passes defended, 5 forced fumbles, and 3 fumble recoveries. Their leader in sacks is Abdul Carter with 3, and he has 2 passes defended and a forced fumble as well. Penn State will not just get pressure on you on the exterior. They will go straight up in your face with their defensive tackles and get pressure on you that way as well. And as for USC, defensively, they have forced 6 sacks on the year. They have not been all that good in rushing the passer. 3 interceptions, 13 passes defended, 5 forced fumbles, and 4 fumble recoveries. Look out for Eric Gentry for USC, one of their better players, linebacker for them. Pay attention to Kamari Ramsey, Akili Arnold. Look at Nate Clifton and Gavin Meyer on the interior of that defensive line. Pay attention as well to Jalen Smith. Look for Penn State to Zane Durant, Devon J. Thomas, Abdul Carter, Donnie Dennis Sutton on the defensive line, Tony Roas and Kobe King at linebacker, and I'd say A.J. Harris at corner, one of their better players in the secondary. Moving on to trench warfare and special teams, I got to give Penn State the edge in the trenches by a mile. Much better offensive line, much better defensive line, no further questions. Penn State has had some encouraging developments on special teams. They tried out a new kicker in Ryan Barker, and he went 2 of 2 for field goals against UCLA with a long of 40, replacing Sander Sahedek, who has been just inaccurate like he was last season. Excuse me. However, I still have to give special teams to the Trojans. They have a better return game. They have a kicker in Michael Lance, who's 7 of 9 right now with a long of 54. Did very well against Minnesota. And Eddie Czaplicki is a good punter. So I would give USC the special teams edge. Coaching edge, I would take Andy Kotelnicki and this offensive staff right now over Lincoln Riley and his offensive staff. Straight up. And a huge part of this is not just the play calling. I think that Kotelnicki is a better play caller right now than Lincoln Riley is, by the way. Also, side note for USC fans, head coaches who call plays do not win national championships. Just ask Ryan Day. That's not how that works. You got to be a CEO. So when who's USC's offensive line coach? When Josh Henson is fired because he is not he's not a good offensive line coach, just isn't. When he is axed, look for an offensive coordinator. Look for a good play caller along with a good offensive line coach. And Phil Trautwein, who I was critical of early, has done a wonderful job, I think, with Penn State's offensive line, which is night and day different and closer to the 10 end of the spectrum rather than the 1 end of the spectrum where USC is in terms of offensive line play, depth, recruiting, and development. And as for strength and conditioning, that ties into the trenches as well, and how USC, I think, is a deep team with players who are ready to step up on both sides of the football. As for defensive staff and for the head coach, I have to give a push. I think that Riley and Franklin have things about them that are both good and also bad. They, in recent memory, have had equally questionable moments in big games. And defensively, both of these staffs are elite. If you put a gun to my head, I would actually lean USC's defensive staff and probably Lincoln Riley too at the head coaching position, because at least he can draw up wonderful plays and sometimes win a big game, whereas James Franklin is even worse in that category. But Penn State, I think, has the coaching edge in this game. And as for my prediction here, I'm going to keep it brief because I've already went over my desired time per usual. But I think Penn State covers, and I think they win 38-17. I think they win big here, and I think they dominate. And I don't think that it will be all that close for long because Penn State by a mile is USC's best opponent. Penn State right now would smother LSU. They would smother Michigan. They would beat Michigan in the big house. And James Franklin is incapable of winning in the big house when it has a crowd. They would annihilate Minnesota. If you gave Penn State USC's schedule, they'd be 5-0 and no one would be saying they're overrated. That's what would happen if you gave Penn State USC schedule. They would work that thing. And they're going to work USC in their own house. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that 5.5 point spread I think it's too tight. I think D'Anton Lynn is a genius. I've compared him to Albert Einstein, for crying out loud. He's awesome. But no matter what he tries to do in scheme, he is not going to stop this Penn State rushing attack. He can't because he doesn't have the players. And if he tries to and is somewhat successful, guess what's going to happen? Drew Aller, thanks to Kotelnicki, and Harrison Wallace and Tyler Warren will go over the top, and that rushing defense will open right up as USC will once again have to adjust to stop the passing offense. Penn State is just diverse. They're balanced. They're really good at everything. They right now are a jack of all trades. Some would say they're a master. They're a master of none, but at least they're balanced. And I think that they are a master at some things, like getting to the quarterback, stopping the run, and also daring you to stop the run and then telling you that you can't do it. So I think Penn State wins big here. They move on to 6-0, achieve bowl eligibility, start looking toward Ohio State, and I think they match up better with Ohio State than Oregon does. Could be a poorly aged take, though. USC falls to 3-3, 1-3 in Big Ten Conference play, and at this point you're just looking to survive the season, finish strong, and enter 2025 with some serious momentum. Thank you so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Conolulu OH as well. He moved from an All-American to Heisman member recently. Thank you for being a Heisman member. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler Nine, Jolton Kush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being All-American, or All-Conference, rather, members. Check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone. Go Trojans and go Nittany Lions.